guys, what is up? Chris here with Cohesive Friendship Unit, just me today. Guys, the xCloud beta from Microsoft is finally out, promising to go head-to-head with things like Stadia and PlayStation Now during this season of streaming, where these streaming game services are finally starting to creep out at the end of 2019. What was promised with xCloud is a large catalog of games you can stream from just about any device, anywhere, with almost any or no controller at all. And what we currently have is a beta program which supports a narrow range of devices, only phones, only the Xbox One Bluetooth controller at no cost. I happen to have a phone that supports the program, a Pixel 3a. I happen to have an Xbox One Bluetooth controller, and I happen to have access to the beta. So this is what I think. But before we get into it, guys, please consider subscribing, throwing a like if you liked the video, and if you got into the program, what you guys are thinking. And we have a playlist for these game streaming services. I just did a review of PS Now. We've talked a fair amount about Project Stream and Stadia. You can check out that playlist if you want. Let's start out with the good. This is a great catalog for beta, and it really shows how exclusives and modern titles matter. This catalog really just blows Stadia out of the water. Even if Xbox doesn't have the generation-defining exclusives, they still have great games like Gears of War 5, Halo 5, and Sea of Thieves, Forza, all really solid titles that Stadia just can't seem to muster with their 12 games at launch. Xbox is already blowing Stadia's launch out of the water, and it's just in beta. And where PS Now only has Windows support apart from Sony PlayStation 4 support for streaming, this is starting at Android only and scaling out to other devices, making it more accessible to use when it hits market. That was one of my bigger complaints about Stadia, was it not really being truly portable if you need to use a Windows machine, and if you're a Mac user, kind of out of luck. And this helps realize the dream of anywhere gaming. You pull out your Android phone and you pull out your Xbox controller. In the future, they're going to have mapped buttons onto the screen if you'd like. So you might not even need an Xbox controller depending on what game you're playing, and you are good to go. You're playing games. And it works quickly and easily. Everything carries over: your account, your achievements, your friends, etc. And everything is enabled. Any online mode you can think of. Let's talk about the bad and the ugly, the not so good. It only works currently right now, I would say, on 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And this is not necessarily going to be the Wi-Fi that you're going to get at Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's. So plan on using home networks, or maybe good university networks, maybe work networks, but I wouldn't depend on public Wi-Fi for this, like the airport. It's basically unusable at 2.4 gigahertz. I would not even recommend someone try it. It is horrible. But we're going to talk more about latency and reasons why, but at 2.4 gigahertz, it literally cannot even keep an image rolling. And cellular can keep the stream going, but it has pretty severe lag at 4G, at least on Sprint in the city for me. And right now, we can only use our phones, and text can be damn near impossible to read. Granted, I have probably one of the smallest phones you will ever be using on this. It's just not an XL phone, it's not a tablet, it's not a laptop, and it's not a TV. So this is probably the smallest text we'll ever get. That being said, these games were made to be played on TVs, so once you start scaling smaller and smaller, it can get tough. That is something that Xbox is gonna maybe have to figure out a solution to, because it impacts quite a few games. And streams can crash unexpectedly, and that's a bummer. Granted, this is in beta. Next, I want to talk latency. This was something that I was able to measure pretty precisely during my PS Now review, and that's going to be a little bit more difficult in this case. So for instance, I get 24 megabits down and 6 up, and I am in a city, so I'm probably pretty close to one of Microsoft's server centers. When I reviewed PS Now, I suggested minimizing latency as much as possible by using a wired controller, Ethernet, and a low latency screen like a computer monitor or a TV in game mode. And this was to help take any latency, any points of additional latency, and cut them out of the equation. Where you're playing a local game, you might be able to introduce some extra latency by not using game mode, for instance, or using a wireless controller, and adding a few extra seconds of latency might not be as big of an issue. But when you already have latency being introduced by streaming a game, it's important to cut things down as much as possible. The current beta introduces a lot of potential latency spots. For instance, you have to use Bluetooth, introduces some latency, even if it's not much. You have to use your phone screen, and I did some research. I'm not confident enough to say what my phone screen's latency is, but I have a feeling it's not 1 to 5 milliseconds, which is what I'm used to on a monitor. And you have to use Wi-Fi, which introduces even more latency. Also, when I reviewed PS Now, I used slow motion capture. I used 240 frame per second video, and I was able to go frame by frame comparing native PS4 footage to PS Now footage in God of War to measure the difference in increased latency. And I can't do this now because I'm using the phone that I would be using to record that slow-mo footage. All that being said, xCloud is noticeably the worst performer over Project Stream, the Stadia beta, and PlayStation Now. But again, that's because we are forced to introduce a lot more latency than what we're comfortable with usually, where Project Stream basically said you have to use a desktop, you have to have a certain threshold. We encourage Ethernet, and we encourage you to use, for instance, mouse and keyboard support or something. This is much more kind of loose, and it's still not bad, is what I will say about this, especially when you're on 5 gigahertz. All things considered, it's still very playable. I was able to play Halo in multiplayer, and single player I would definitely be fine, but not optimal. You do notice it. It's not terrible, but certainly playable. Again, hopefully this is something that once we can do Ethernet, once we can do wired controllers, once we can do monitors, and as the internet gets better, this will improve, and as this rolls out of beta. So what's the conclusion for xCloud? Xbox is putting themselves in a position to be the streaming king, in my opinion. They have a great catalog, even in beta, which puts it leaps and bounds over Stadia. There is phone support out of the gate, which PS Now doesn't have as a final product, and I think that is extremely essential for a streaming service like this. Right now, the drawbacks are the lack of devices beyond phones, but again, that's already being improved. No clear ultimate quality like 4K, which Stadia does have, but there's no final word on what the highest resolution you're going to be streaming at. PlayStation Now, you're only streaming at 720p, and Stadia, again, you can stream up to 4K. We'll see where Microsoft lands. And currently, I would say there's the worst latency, but we need Ethernet and some other nice-to-haves to truly test this in the proper setting. For beta, this is already going head-to-head with full-blown streaming services, and most importantly, if this gets good enough, this will be the first time that I've really seen the need to not own a console. When your Xbox is now anything, that's a good thing. When the next generation comes out, and instead of buying an Xbox Scarlet, I turn on my Pixel 3a and I'm playing Halo Infinite, that's pretty cool. And that's a feature that I wasn't really seeing on PS Now with their limited device range, and on Stadia for a number of reasons. And those are my thoughts on the xCloud beta. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I will catch you guys next time.